My name is Denise D. Hill, and I am 28 years old. My parents blamed me for keeping my son away, and when my father looked me in the eyes and said, "We're his grandparents," I finally gave him the answer he deserved. "The grandparents who refused to help when he was born?" I said. "He doesn't need them." But that answer did not come from nowhere. It came from months of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, swallowed humiliation, and one tiny baby who became the only family I had left. My life changed the day Eli was born, but the real story began before the hospital room, before the diapers stacked beside my bed, before the silence from my parents became louder than any argument. It began in their kitchen, under the cold white LED lights my father had installed, because he said warm bulbs made everything look old. I remember standing there, with my hands wrapped around a mug I had not taken a sip from, trying to say the words without breaking. "I'm not sure how I'm going to make rent this month," I admitted. My father, Robert, opened a beer and barely looked at me. "You're a grown woman, Denise. Figure it out." My mother, Mary, gave a sharp little laugh from the sink. "You've always been dramatic. Every problem feels like the end of the world to you." I did not answer. I just nodded, picked up my keys, and left. But inside me, something cracked quietly, not loud enough for them to hear. Just a thin fracture somewhere deep, like ice splitting under snow. I had not always been invisible to them. I was their only child, the miracle daughter my mother used to talk about after years of losses she only mentioned when she wanted sympathy. I grew up in that modest house with the red door and the backyard full of weeds my father always promised to fix. They cheered at my school events. They cried when I graduated. They used to call me their blessing. Then warmth became criticism. Pride became disappointment. Maybe it started when I did not go to college right away. Maybe it started when I moved in with my high school boyfriend, Marcus. Too young and too sure love could survive rent, bills, and bad decisions. Maybe it started when Marcus left, and I stayed behind, trying to rebuild while everyone else moved on. Still, I kept showing up. Sunday dinners, doctor appointments for Mom when Dad could not be bothered, roof repairs after a storm ripped off shingles. I kept believing the parents who once held me when I cried would return if I just stayed useful long enough. I did not tell them immediately when I found out I was pregnant. Part of me was still trying to accept it myself. Part of me knew Marcus would panic, and the biggest part of me knew my parents would turn my fear into a lecture. By the time Eli arrived, Marcus and I were over. He was not cruel, just young, overwhelmed, and already halfway out the door. He wanted to stay in school. I wanted my son. So we made an arrangement that hurt, but made sense. I would raise Eli full-time, and Marcus would help when he could. Where the walls smelled faintly of sugar in the morning and old grease at night. I worked nights at a gas station, slept in fragments, and learned that formula disappeared faster than money. Diapers, wipes, medicine, rent it all piled up until I felt like I was drowning while holding a baby above the water. Still, every time Eli curled his tiny fingers around mine, I felt something stronger than fear. I was his mother. That meant I could not disappear. When I missed rent once, then nearly twice, I sold what I could. My old guitar, my game console, a watch my grandfather had left me. When even that was not enough, I did the one thing I had been avoiding. I asked my parents for help, and they laughed. A few weeks later, I stopped by their house unannounced and found out what had happened to my old bedroom. My mother led me upstairs like she was showing off a renovation on television. The walls were dark gray now. Blackout curtains covered the window. A giant screen hung where my posters used to be. Leather recliners, surround sound, a mini fridge. "We figured it was time to make the space useful," Mom said. Useful? I stood in the doorway and imagined bringing Eli there someday, showing him where I grew up, building pillow forts on the floor, telling him stories under the same ceiling that once held mine. That dream died before I could even step inside. Dad called from downstairs. "Wait until the lights dim. Feels just like the movies." I left without saying a word. That night, I held Eli tighter than usual. His chest rose and fell against mine, soft and steady, while I stared at the dark wall of my apartment and understood the truth. They had not just turned my room into a theater. They had erased me. And if they could erase their own daughter that easily, I knew I would never let them erase my son. In the weeks after I saw my old bedroom turned into a private theater, I stopped going over there. I did not announce it. I did not send some dramatic message about boundaries or disappointment. I simply stopped showing up. No Sunday dinners. No fixing things around their house. No checking in to ask if Mom needed a ride to an appointment. My phone stayed quiet for days at a time, and that silence told me everything. They did not call to ask if Eli had enough formula. They did not ask if I had made rent. They did not ask how their grandson was sleeping, eating, growing, breathing. It was like Eli and I had slipped out of their lives, and all they felt was relief at the extra space. So I made Sundays ours. If the weather was decent, I took Eli to the park in the stroller I bought secondhand from a woman 3 neighborhoods over. Sometimes we sat under the big oak near the duck pond, and I would narrate the world to him like he understood every word. That's a dog, baby. That's a cloud. That's Mommy pretending she knows what she's doing. When it rained, we stayed in my apartment and built little towers out of empty formula cans. It was not much. The floor was old, the heater rattled, and the bakery downstairs started mixing dough before sunrise. But it was ours. No one looked at Eli like he was an inconvenience there. Then one Friday afternoon, my mother texted me. Dinner Sunday. That was it. 2 words. No apology. No, how are you? No, how's Eli? Just a command disguised as an invitation, like nothing had happened. Like the kitchen conversation and the theater upstairs were small misunderstandings I should have already swallowed. I almost ignored it. I should have. But there was still a tiny, foolish part of me that wondered if maybe they had realized something. Maybe the silence had made them uncomfortable. Maybe Mary had walked past that dark theater room and remembered me as a little girl asleep under glow-in-the-dark stars. Maybe Robert had finally understood that his daughter had not come begging for luxury. She had come asking not to drown. So I went. When I arrived, the table was already set. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the broccoli casserole Mom always made too salty but insisted was everyone's favorite. Eli was strapped to my chest in his carrier, asleep from the drive, one tiny fist curled against my shirt. I walked in quietly and saw my parents already sitting with Jason. Jason was my cousin, my uncle's son, 3 years younger than me, and somehow always the golden child in my parents' eyes. He had flunked out of college twice, crashed 2 cars his father paid for, and still managed to be spoken of like a promising investment. He smiled when he saw me. Uncomfortable, but polite. "Look who decided to show up," Dad said without standing. Mom's eyes flicked toward the carrier. "Oh, you brought the baby?" The baby. Not Eli. Not my grandson. The baby. She did not ask to hold him. She did not even lean closer to see if he was awake. She turned back to Jason and asked him to continue telling her about his new job selling solar panels, and for nearly an hour, I sat there listening to him talk like he had personally invented sunlight. Eventually, Dad looked at me over his plate. "So? Still working nights at that gas station?" "Yes," I said. "It's steady for now." Jason shifted in his chair. "That sounds rough. What do you do with Eli during your shift?" "I take him with me when I have to. When I can't, a neighbor helps." Mom's mouth tightened. "A gas station isn't exactly safe for a baby, Denise." I looked at her. "I asked for help." Dad set down his fork. "We raised you to be independent, not to come crying every time life gets hard." Jason looked down at his plate. "Maybe I should go." "No," Mom snapped, then softened instantly for him. "You're fine, sweetie. Denise just gets like this sometimes." Like this. I did not know what that meant anymore. Tired? Hurt? Too honest? Then Mom smiled brightly, as if changing the subject to something cheerful. Jason might be moving in with us for a while, until he gets on his feet. I blinked. Into the guest room? No, she said. Into your old room. The theater is just a few things, really. Jason can help us move it all to the basement. For a moment I could not speak. When I needed a room, I was a grown woman who had to figure it out. When Jason needed one, the theater could be dismantled overnight. He just needs stability, Mom added. He's family. Dad nodded. Jason has potential. He needs the right environment to thrive. I swallowed a laugh so bitter it hurt. After Jason left, Mom sighed like I had embarrassed her. You didn't have to make it awkward. I stood slowly, careful not to wake Eli. Let me understand this. You would not help me and your grandson when I was drowning, but you are bending over backward for Jason because he has potential. Dad's face hardened. Don't turn this into something it's not. You already did, I said. You have been showing me where I stand for years. They stared at me like I was ungrateful, like I had walked into their home and ruined a perfectly good dinner with the truth. So I left before dessert. After that night, I stopped replying to their texts. I stopped sending updates about Eli. I blocked their numbers for a while just so I could breathe. But news still reached me through Aunt Cheryl and old neighbors. Jason moved in. They helped him buy a used car. Mom bragged at church about being proud of her kids. Plural. Apparently, I no longer counted. 2 months passed after that dinner, and I learned something important about silence. When you choose it, people call you cold. When they use it against you, they call it peace. My parents did not reach out to apologize. They did not ask if Eli had grown out of his newborn clothes or whether he was sleeping through the night. They did not ask if I had found safer childcare or if my rent was paid. They simply carried on with Jason in my old room, bragging to anyone who would listen about how generous they were, while I worked nights, counted coins for formula, and taught myself not to expect rescue. I heard things anyway. Aunt Cheryl told me Jason had been driving the used car Dad helped him buy. A neighbor said Mom had been glowing at church, telling people how full the house felt again. Full. That word stayed with me. My son and I had been pushed to the edge of their lives, and somehow their house felt fuller without us. Then I ran into my mother at the grocery store. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the fluorescent lights made everyone look tired. Eli sat in the cart, giggling at cereal boxes and trying to grab everything within reach. He had 2 tiny teeth by then and a laugh that sounded like hiccups. I was comparing prices on baby wipes when I heard my name. Denise? Mary stood at the end of the aisle, holding a basket with nothing in it but coffee creamer and a magazine. For a second, she looked genuinely surprised, not just to see me, but to see Eli looking clean, fed, happy, alive, like some secret part of her had expected me to fail visibly. He's getting big, she said. Before I could stop her, she reached out and touched Eli's cheek like she had earned the right. He stared at her, curious, and I gently moved the cart back. Mom's mouth tightened. Her eyes traveled over me, my work shoes, my tired face, the cheap hoodie with formula dried near the sleeve. You look different, she said. Are you eating okay? I did not answer. I did not trust myself. She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was offering wisdom instead of poison. You know, if you had just been more grateful, we could have helped you. But you always act like a victim. That was the moment. Not because it was the cruelest thing she had ever said, but because it was the wisdom instead of clearest. She would never see me as a daughter fighting to survive. She would only see me as an inconvenience who had failed to praise her enough. I turned the cart and walked away without buying the wipes. The real betrayal came later that night. Eli was teething badly, screaming with that sharp, helpless cry that makes every nerve in your body stand up. I was pacing the apartment with a cold teething ring in one hand and a bottle warming on the counter when my phone buzzed. Then again. 3 missed calls from Aunt Cheryl. I set Eli in his crib, turned on his mobile, and played her voicemail. Denise, it's Cheryl. I know we don't talk much, but I thought you should know before someone else tells you. Your mom posted something on Facebook about Eli. I'm sorry. My hands shook as I opened the app I had not used in months. Notifications flooded the screen. Tags, comments, messages from people I barely knew. Then I saw it. A photo of Eli sleeping in his car seat. The caption read, "Meet our newest little angel, Eli. Our sweet grandson, who we're so proud to help raise. Being grandparents is the greatest joy in the world." I stared at it until the words stopped looking like words. They were not helping raise him. They had never bought diapers, never held him through a fever, never watched me cry over rent. They had refused us when we needed them, then stolen his face to collect praise. The comments were worse. "You'll be wonderful grandparents. He's so lucky to have you. Mary, you look born for this chapter." I zoomed in on the photo and realized where it came from. The park, the duck pond. That afternoon when I had seen Mom across the grass walking with a friend and turned away because I did not have the energy for small talk. She had taken a picture without asking. Then I saw Jason's comment. "Can't wait to help babysit again this weekend. He's such a chill kid." Again. There had never been an again. My stomach went cold. I called Carrie, my neighbor, the woman who watched Eli 2 nights a week when my shift made it impossible to bring him. I asked about the night her sister was visiting, the night she said a trusted friend could help. "Oh," Carrie said, confused. "Your mom stopped by Lynn's place. She said she missed Eli. Lynn said she seemed sweet, so she let her hold him. I didn't think it would be a problem." I barely remember ending the call. They had found a way to touch him without my permission, to hold him, to photograph him, to parade him online like proof of love they had never shown. I sat on the floor outside Eli's room while he finally slept, and I made myself a promise. They would never use my son as a prop again. The days after the Facebook post blurred together until I could barely tell one from the next. I went to work. I came home. I fed Eli. I bathed him. I rocked him until his breathing softened. Then I sat on the edge of my mattress, because I did not even own a couch anymore, and stared at the wall until morning felt like another punishment. I was not angry in the loud way people imagine. I was emptied out, drained, like my parents had reached into the last soft place inside me and used Eli's face to carve their names into it. I did not tell everyone what happened. Not Aunt Cheryl, not Carrie, not even Marcus. What was I supposed to say? That my parents refused to help me when I was drowning, then posted my son online, as if they were raising him, that they had found a way to hold him behind my back? That Jason, who probably could not name Eli's bedtime routine if someone paid him, was pretending to babysit him in the comments? It sounded unreal even to me. That was the cruel part about people like my parents. They did not always break things in obvious ways. They smiled. They phrased cruelty as concern. They made you sound bitter when you tried to explain the wound. 2 weeks later, Eli got sick. Nothing dramatic, at least not to anyone who was not alone with a baby and no money. A rash bloomed red along his neck. His skin felt warm. He cried until his voice turned raspy, and I could not tell if it was teething or something worse. Payday was still days away. Rent was already late. My landlord had called twice that week, each message shorter than the last. I sat on the bathroom floor with Eli pressed against my chest, whispering, it's okay, over and over. But I was not saying it to him. I was saying it to myself. When he finally slept, I did not move for hours. The tile was cold under me. My back ached. In the mirror across from the tub, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Hollow eyes, pale skin, hair pulled into a crooked knot, formula dried on her sleeve. That was my rock bottom. Not a screaming fight, not a dramatic collapse, just me on a bathroom floor, holding my sick baby, wondering if I was going to make it through the month. And the worst part was, I almost called my mother. I stared at her contact for 20 minutes. I told myself it would be for Eli, not for me. Maybe if I sounded calm, maybe if I used the right words. Maybe if I swallowed enough pride, she would offer a ride to the clinic, a bag of groceries, anything. Then I heard her voice in my head. You always act like a victim. I turned my phone off. That night, something changed for good. I stopped hoping they would become the parents I needed. I stopped waiting for love to arrive dressed as an apology. The next morning, while Eli slept, I wrote a list on the back of a junk mail envelope. Better job, childcare I can trust, new place, online school, freedom. It looked impossible. I folded it anyway and tucked it under Eli's crib. A few days later, I called a community center that offered free resources for single parents. I almost hung up twice, but the woman on the phone had a gentle voice and told me to come by Saturday morning. So I did, Eli on my hip, anxiety burning in my chest like acid. The receptionist smiled. You here for the single mothers group? I nodded because if I spoke, I would cry. She handed me a pamphlet. You're not the only one. Not even close. That was the first time I cried in public, quietly, in a folding chair, surrounded by women with babies on their laps and exhaustion in their bones. We talked about sleep schedules, formula prices, budgeting on minimum wage, and how to survive being told you were not enough. Slowly, something inside me began to wake back up. I was not broken. I was rebuilding. Someone in that group told me about a nonprofit that helped single parents access online education grants. I signed up the same day. Within 2 weeks, I was enrolled in a remote IT certification program. I studied during naps, during midnight feedings, with one hand on the keyboard and the other patting Eli's back. I started picking up small online jobs, data entry, virtual assistant work, anything that paid, without forcing me to leave him with strangers. For the first time in months, I had a plan. Then the court papers arrived. A plain white envelope on my doormat. My name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a petition for grandparent visitation. My parents claimed I was unstable, financially incapable, and intentionally alienating Eli from family connection. Jason had even attached a statement saying I had become paranoid and aggressive. I sat on the floor reading it with Eli asleep against my shoulder. They had refused to be family when we needed them. Now they were trying to use the law to take a piece of him. And as the fear turned cold in my chest, I realized something. They had no idea I had already started climbing. For 2 days after the court papers arrived, I moved through life like I was underwater. I changed Eli's diapers. I warmed his bottles. I answered work messages. I smiled at strangers when I had to. But every quiet second, the same sentence came back to me. They are trying to take him. Not fully, maybe. Not yet. Just weekends. Just holidays. Just enough legal access to wedge themselves into our lives and turn my son into something they could schedule, display, and control. The petition called me unstable, financially incapable, hostile. It said I was keeping Eli from a loving family out of spite. Jason's statement made me sound like some paranoid, bitter woman screaming in grocery store aisles and punishing innocent grandparents. I read his words at my kitchen table while Eli slept in his bouncer. And for 1 minute I wanted to throw up. Then I folded the papers, placed them in a folder, and wrote one word on the front in black marker. Proof. Because if they wanted to make this official, then I would become official too. The climb had already started at the community center. One of the women in the single mothers group told me about a nonprofit that helped parents like us get online education grants. I applied that night, while Eli slept across my lap. Within 2 weeks, I was enrolled in a remote IT certification program. It was not glamorous. It was not some dramatic overnight success. It was me at 2 a.m, reading about networks with one hand on the keyboard and the other rubbing Eli's back while he fussed in his sleep. I quit depending on the gas station more and more. I picked up online work wherever I could find it. Data entry, virtual assistant tasks, small tech support jobs that paid little at first, then a little more. When I got my first $200 freelance payment, I bought a used laptop from a woman on Facebook Marketplace because my old one had a crack running across the screen like a lightning strike. When I passed my first IT exam, I taped the certificate to the fridge. Eli slapped it with sticky hands and laughed, like he knew we had won something. Slowly, the apartment stopped feeling like a trap. I paid rent before the warning call came. I bought diapers without doing math in the aisle for 20 minutes. I stopped choosing between formula and electricity. Then, after 3 months of scraping, studying, and working until my eyes burned, I found a small duplex on the other side of town. It had 2 bedrooms, clean walls, working heat, and neighbors who did not smoke under my window at midnight. It was not fancy. It was safe. The first night there, I put Eli's crib in his own room and stood in the doorway for a long time. He looked so small under the soft nightlight glow, one hand tucked under his cheek. I whispered, "We made it here, baby." Then I sat on the floor and cried, because for once the tears did not come from fear. They came from relief. I did not post about the move. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell anyone connected to them. I kept our life small, quiet, and protected. The only people who knew the details were Aunt Cheryl, Carrie, the women from the center, and eventually Miriam. Miriam was the attorney the nonprofit connected me with. Pro bono. Stern voice, kind eyes, no patience for emotional manipulation dressed up as family values. She read the petition in silence, flipped through Jason's statement, then looked up at me. "They don't have a strong case," she said. "But people like this don't always need a strong case to cause damage. So we're going to be stronger." For the first time since the envelope arrived, I breathed. We built the file piece by piece. Screenshots of my mother's Facebook post where she pretended to help raise Eli. Messages showing months of silence. Carrie's written statement explaining how Mary manipulated her way into holding Eli without my knowledge. Aunt Cheryl's statement about the family pattern no one wanted to admit out loud. My pay records. My certification progress. The lease for the duplex. Eli's pediatrician notes showing he was healthy, cared for, on schedule. Every page felt like a brick in a wall they could not charm their way through. At the same time, I kept rebuilding myself. I walked with Eli every morning. I ate real meals again. I journaled at night when my thoughts got too loud. I took photos of Eli, not for anyone else to like or comment on, but for us. His first steps across the living room, banana mashed into his hair, his laugh when I pretended to sneeze. One night, I found the old envelope under his crib, the list I had written on my worst night. Better job, childcare I trust, new place, school, freedom. Every item had a check beside it now except one, freedom. And I finally understood that freedom did not mean hiding forever. It meant facing them in court and letting them see, legally and publicly, that they had no power over my son. The first hearing was 2 weeks away when my phone rang on a Saturday morning. It was Marcus. His voice was tight. "Denise, are you alone?" I looked at Eli in his high chair, smearing applesauce across the tray. "Why?" I asked. Marcus took a shaky breath. "Your parents came to see me." "Your parents came to see me," Marcus said, and for a second, the kitchen seemed to tilt. Eli was in his high chair, happily smashing applesauce into the tray, completely unaware that his name had just become the center of another attack. I gripped the counter. "What do you mean they came to see you?" Marcus exhaled shakily. "They showed up at campus yesterday. No warning. They said they were worried about Eli. They said you were spiraling." My stomach went cold. "Spiraling?" "They told me you were unstable, paranoid, refusing help, cutting everyone off. They said they were stepping in because Eli needed a stable family." His voice sharpened. "Denise, they were trying to make you sound dangerous." I closed my eyes, but that only made my mother's voice easier to hear. "You always act like a victim." "What did you say?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a second. "I asked if they were out of their minds." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Marcus and I had failed each other in a lot of ways, but in that moment, he did not fail Eli. Then your mom said I was young, he continued, that I had already wasted enough time tied to you. She said if I agreed to sign something giving them temporary primary custody, they would help me with tuition. My hand went numb around the phone. They offered you money? $10,000, cash, in an envelope. I sat down slowly because my legs stopped trusting me. Across the kitchen, Eli laughed at his own messy hands. Did you take it? I whispered. No, Marcus said immediately. But I took photos, and I recorded the conversation. For the first time in months, the fear inside me did not spread. It narrowed, became focus. My parents had always been careful, cruel in ways that sounded like concern, selfish in ways that could be explained away. But this was different. This was proof. Real proof. Not a feeling, not a pattern, not a wound nobody else could see. A cash bribe, a recorded attempt to undermine my rights as Eli's mother. I met with Miriam the next morning. She listened to the audio without interrupting, her face still except for the slight lift of her eyebrows when my mother's voice said, 10,000 up front, Marcus, just until Denise gets herself together. When the recording ended, Miriam leaned back in her chair. Well, she said, this changes things. We updated everything. Marcus signed an affidavit. The photos of the envelope went into the file. Miriam added language about attempted coercion, interference with parental rights, and malicious intent. They tried to look worried, she told me, but worried people don't bring cash. Within days, the judge granted a temporary injunction, barring my parents from contacting me or Marcus outside legal channels. It was not the final victory, but it gave me air. For the first time, there was a wall between us that they could not guilt-trip their way around. And while Miriam prepared the legal side, my life kept moving in a direction my parents had never expected. At work, I caught a system vulnerability during a late-night support review, something small enough to miss but big enough to cause serious damage if ignored. I wrote a report, patched what I could, and sent it up the chain. 2 days later, I was on a video call with the CTO. A week after that, I was offered a full-time promotion with benefits, nearly double my pay, plus a company laptop, and 6 months of childcare support if I needed it. I cried after the call, not because everything was fixed, but because someone had finally looked at my effort and called it valuable instead of dramatic. With the extra money, I hired a private investigator to look into Jason's claims. Miriam said it might help. What came back was more than help. It was a gift wrapped in public records. Jason had no criminal conviction, but he had evictions, unpaid debts, and a restraining order filed by an ex-girlfriend 2 years earlier after months of harassment and angry outbursts. He was living rent-free in my old room while telling a court I was unstable. He was the right environment my parents wanted near Eli. We added it all. Screenshots, records, dates, statements. The file became too thick for Miriam's first binder. Then I made one final move. I posted anonymously in a local parenting group. No names, no accusations I could not support. Just a question. What would you do if your child's grandparents filed for visitation while offering the child's father cash to help them get custody and housing a relative with a history of harassment? The post spread faster than I expected. People talked. They always do. A few days later, my mother called Miriam's office crying. She said they never meant for it to go this far. They only wanted to be involved. Miriam's reply was calm. Then they should not have tried to buy him. The hearing was 2 weeks away, and for the first time, I was not afraid to walk in. The courthouse felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the way the walls seemed built to swallow every nervous breath. I wore a navy blouse I had ironed 3 times the night before, then ironed again after Eli wrinkled it by grabbing my sleeve with both hands that morning. He sat beside me in his stroller, chewing on a rubber giraffe, completely unaware that the people trying to carve themselves into his life were sitting less than 50 feet away. Miriam arrived exactly on time, carrying a briefcase and two thick binders labeled so neatly they looked almost dangerous. She gave me one firm nod. "They don't know what's about to hit them," she whispered. When our case was called, my parents were already seated with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a red blazer who carried herself like she expected the whole thing to be finished before lunch. Dad avoided my eyes. Mom gave me a tight little smile, the same one she used at church when pretending everything was fine. Jason was not there. That told me more than his presence would have. Judge Whitmore was tall, silver-haired, and silent long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. He looked through the paperwork, adjusted his glasses, then said, "Let's begin." The first 30 minutes were exactly what I expected. Their attorney painted me as isolated, emotional, hostile to family involvement, and too overwhelmed to raise Eli without oversight. My mother dabbed at her eyes at the right moments. My father nodded solemnly, like this was painful for him, like dragging his own daughter into court was an act of sacrifice. They described themselves as loving grandparents who only wanted connection, not control. Not attention. Connection. Then Miriam stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She opened the first binder and started with who I actually was. A letter from Eli's pediatrician, praising my consistency and attentiveness. A statement from Carrie confirming Eli was always clean, fed, and cared for. A statement from Aunt Cheryl describing my parents' long pattern of dismissing me until appearances were involved. Then my pay stubs, my promotion letter, my lease, my child care support, my IT certificates. Page after page of proof that while they were calling me unstable, I had been building a stable life with both hands. Then came the Facebook post. Miriam displayed the photo of Eli sleeping in his car seat, the caption where my mother claimed she was proud to help raise him, and the comments praising my parents for a role they had never played. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. Then Miriam played the recording. My mother's voice filled the courtroom, calm and cold. 10,000 up front, Marcus. Just temporarily. Denise isn't ready. This is what's best for the baby. Nobody moved. I did not look at my parents while it played. I looked at Eli. He was still chewing his giraffe, blinking sleepily, innocent of every ugly thing being done in his name. When the audio ended, Miriam let the silence sit there. Then she submitted Jason's records. Evictions, debts, the restraining order from his ex-girlfriend, the history my parents had conveniently forgotten while presenting him as a trustworthy family witness. "Your Honor," Miriam said, "the plaintiffs have misrepresented their intentions from the beginning. They refused meaningful involvement when this child needed support, then attempted to manufacture a public image of grandparenthood. They used false statements, unauthorized contact, and financial coercion to undermine my client's parental rights. This petition is not about Eli's welfare. It is about control." For the first time, my mother's hands shook. My father stared at the table. Their attorney stopped taking notes. Judge Whitmore finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Grandparent visitation exists to preserve meaningful relationships, not to reward manipulation or punish a parent for setting boundaries. He looked directly at my parents. Based on the evidence presented, especially the recorded attempt to interfere with parental rights through payment, this petition is denied. My breath caught. Then he turned to me. "Miss Hill, this court finds you to be a responsible and capable parent. Full custody remains with you." The gavel came down. It was over. But I was not finished. I stood, walked over to my parents, and stopped just far enough away that they could not pretend this was affection. "You taught me a lot," I said quietly. "Just not the way you think. You taught me what kind of mother I will never be." Mom opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. "I don't need your apology. Eli doesn't need your presence. From now on, you are strangers to us. Strangers don't get visits. They don't get updates. They don't get photos. You had your chance to be family, and you used it to lie." Then I turned and walked away. Outside, Eli laughed at pigeons in the courthouse courtyard, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. In the weeks that followed, Marcus formally updated our custody agreement, naming me Eli's sole legal guardian until further notice. Jason disappeared from town. My parents told people they withdrew the case for peace, but the truth had already traveled faster than their excuses. One morning, months later, Eli toddled into the bathroom while I brushed my teeth, lifted his little arms, and said, "Mama happy." I looked at us in the mirror and realized he was right. My parents still live in that house with the red door and the theater they built where my childhood used to be. But now there is no audience left, and Eli and I are finally free.